Greetings from Assumption. This is Father Peter answering your questions again that you have submitted to the church, or to my email, I should say, and for me to answer them. One of the questions today came about the role of women in the church and what is the stance of the church, what is my personal stance, which my personal stance is in accordance with the church. There's no differing opinions or views there. But I wanted to take a moment just to speak about a little bit about the questions that came. I have the piece of paper over here. It says, what is your stance in the church as it pertains to women? For example, can women wear pants in church? Can women worship and take communion while on their monthly cycle? And why are women not allowed in the altar? Well, first of all, we have to look back into the history of the church, and I'm standing deliberately in front of the icon of the Virgin Mary to my side here, because without the Virgin Mary in the world, there would be no Christ. Without a woman bringing the Christ child into the world, we wouldn't have Christ as human flesh. So it took a woman to bring God into the church, and not into the church, but into the world, I should say. So, and it's not just a woman, it's not just a saint, but she has a title that's beyond any of the other titles in the church. So we hear there's Saint so-and-so, there's Prophet so-and-so, and all these different titles, but the Virgin Mary is not referred to as Saint Mary or titles that are of that category. She's referred to as Panagia, the All-Holy One, the Theotokos, the birth giver of God, the Virgin Mary. She has these titles that are beyond just calling her Saint Mary. So if we're looking in the church, we have to understand that the title of the Virgin Mary speaks volumes to the role of her in the church, as well as the understanding that women are not considered second-class citizens or those who are, relegated to just making prosphora or koliva. And even in the history of the church, too, when we look at the church under persecution and we look at the church throughout the history, we see that women were really cultivating the home church. And you might even see that today. You might be a woman watching this right now, and you are the ones dragging your children in to say, come look at this, or father's talking about something, or watching, learning, all those things. Women have been typically the teachers in the home church, but the priest has always been the spiritual father of the community at large. One of the questions here says, why are women not allowed in the altar? Well, women used to be allowed in the altar. There used to be the role of deaconesses. So now we just have deacons. But there used to be the role of deaconesses, which were women who were specifically ordained to minister to women in the church, to visit those who were widows, those who had newborns, to do a ministry, an outreach ministry, and also serve in the church as deaconesses in the service. But that fell into disuse a long time ago because of abuse. And you can kind of let your mind play in there. But the reason that's not around anymore is because things have fallen into disuse. Even the role of deacon, as we see in today's day and age, is really in minimal use. So if you want to say, well, deaconesses, why are deaconesses gone and deacons are still here? Really take an inventory of how many deacons there are in our metropolis or even in the archdiocese. There's very few. And there's very few because the training and the position of a deacon has almost become a stepping stone now to becoming a priest. But the role of deacon itself is not what it used to be either. Most deacons are lay deacons now, which means they have a profession that they do during the week, and then they help out in church services when they are called upon, either from a hierarch or from a parish priest or a community to help. But it's really a role that has fallen into not as much use as it used to be. However, there has been talk about reviving the role of deaconesses. There's preliminary talks on that. There's some books that have been written and some lectures that have been given speaking about bringing back the role of deaconesses. But as you can tell today, we don't have that role reinstated in the church. There are many women in the church that are saints. So when we look at the saints in the church, many times people will think, well, it's just men saints. But there are an extraordinary amount of women saints as well. However, in some of the iconography, we don't see them because of the limited iconography in churches. It's minimized. So what am I saying by this? Is many times in the church, there's not enough iconography that is put up on the walls in order to include saints who are not kind of the go-to saints, like St. George, St. Peter, St. Paul, St. Demetrius, and the ones that we typically understand as being kind of the top saints. We see St. Constantine and Helen. We see St. Helen in icons all the time, and she had a very extraordinary role in the survival of the church, as well as in sainthood as well. But we don't see those icons as much because iconography, like I said, is limited in the church. Even our church here at Assumption, we have some icons up, but we have a lot of graphics and art. But we do have female saints in the stained glass along the walls on the side of the church. So it's not that necessarily that the iconography is not there, or that there's not female saints, but it's just a matter really of the amount of iconography that needs to be up in order to include the whole compendium of male and female saints. Are women allowed to wear pants in church? If you can dress up, great. If you can't, my perspective is this, and I will share a story with you, that years ago there was a man who used to come into church, and the man was not dressed fancy at all. He had jeans, he had a t-shirt on. He was really he would just come in the back. He would be in Orthros. He would be back there, and then he would leave. And I remember one of the yayas in the community came up to me and she said, "Father, tell him to go home and change." And I said, "I'm not going to go home and tell him to change. I don't even know who he is. I see him pop in and then he leaves." And she says, "Well, you should tell him he needs to dress up. This is the church." And then she gave me, her yayology on how the church is set up and how we're supposed to wear the best of everything, which I'm not opposed to people dressing up. However, that can be abused too, where people dress up so much that they fail to participate in the service, and they're more focused on, is their coat look right, is their makeup on right, is the suit the right fit or whatever. But getting back to my story. So one day I was in Orthros, and I usually miss the man. He would never stay for liturgy. He was in Orthros, and I was reading the morning gospel, and I saw the man. I finished the gospel, and I literally ran to the back of the church. And as I ran to the back of the church, he was there, and he thought he did something wrong. He's like, "Well, I'm sorry, Father." I said, "No, you didn't do anything wrong." I said, "But I just wanted to say hello to you, to see who you are." And I said, "I see you here, and then you're not here for the liturgy." And he said, "Father, I'm really on hard times with my life, and I had to pick up a second job. I fix automobiles, and I work on Sundays, but I start really early in the morning. I work, and I take a break, and I come here during my break. I light a candle, I sit for my break, and then I have to go back to work again." And hearing that, and hearing how the man was so humbled and brought low by his own life situation, but yet he came to church, and he thought I was going to yell at him or critique him for his clothing. And the lady who was always, the front row attendee, who was hoping that I was going to scold the man, it didn't happen. And the man, I said, "Well, if you're able to stay, or you want to talk, or if I can meet with you another time just to kind of find out more about your life, and if there's anything we can do here at the church to help you, please let me know." But my point is, He came in his clothing. That was not a concern of mine, provided the clothing was not provocative or inappropriate or showing something, some body art that the person's proud to show off that would be inappropriate. I don't take issue with the pants or the dress. I mean, people have different restrictions. We had one lady once as a parishioner who had surgery on her leg, and she was so offended by herself because she had to wear pants because she had a brace on her leg, and she had to wrap it over the top, and she couldn't function in a dress maneuvering around. And I said, just come, dress appropriate, but come. Now, if you're able to wear a dress, that's great. Do I prefer people wearing a dress? I think it's nice. I think it's a nice thing, or a skirt or whatever. I think it's nice. I think guys look nice in suits. However, I'm not going to kick somebody out of the church because they wear something different other than a suit or a dress or a skirt. If you just come dressed appropriately, but most of all, come to the church understanding that you're coming to pray and you're not to be a spectacle for yourself or a spectacle for other people. And a preaching class that I had years ago, the professor said, don't ever get your ears pierced as a preacher. And I said, it was kind of funny. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that anyways. But he said, when you talk to somebody, if they have large earrings, it will distract you from actually hearing what they're saying. So we can become a distraction for other people around us and even ourselves by how we dress. So dress appropriate. And if you have questions about that specifically, ask me. But I think everyone knows what appropriate and what inappropriate is in common times. Even in weddings, people will ask, does it have to be over the shoulder dress, or can it be straight across? I don't want to see anything that's inappropriate, and I don't think anybody else deserves to see anything inappropriate either. Which also, this is not just about women, but men. No one wants to see your chest hanging out in a church service. So use the buttons and make it all the way up. If it's a polo shirt, just one button is plenty. No one's here to get impressed, and no one should be distracted by that, including me. So keep that in mind. Why are women not allowed on the altar? Well, women were allowed on the altar, and if you go to the monastery in Wisconsin or a female convent somewhere, you will see women in the altar. There's also special blessings that are given to some women who might be the caretakers of a church or cleaner of the church. So keep that in mind. As far as on a cycle, can women worship and take communion while on their cycle? That's up to you and your spiritual father to come up with, how that works for you. It goes back to the Old Testament, where the flow of blood out of a person had defiled the person. You can read about that in the book of Leviticus. But we also administer communion to those who are in hospitals, who are receiving blood, who have catheters, who have IV bags and different surgeries and different things. Sometimes even people with open wounds where blood is visible, is showing, is coming out of the person. And that, keep that in mind. It's for the healing of our soul and our body, and for forgiveness of sins and life eternal. So if this is a specific question, like I said, your spiritual father might have different direction for you. For those here, in the church, keep in mind that was the flow of blood was something that defiled the person in the Old Testament. But in today's day and age, we give communion to people in hospitals that are just many times having blood flow and different things going on. So I personally encourage everyone, if you are prepared to receive the sacrament, you should receive the sacrament. You should be prayerful. And if anything distracts you, if that's a distraction or you're not feeling well or something, whether you're a man or a woman and you have issues that are distracting you from being able to focus on receiving communion, then maybe it would be time to wait. However, I do encourage all of you to worship no matter what state you're in. There's people who are sick. It's not just about having your cycle, but when you say, can women worship? Yeah, we should worship all the time. We should always be praying to God. We should always be asking for Him for help, and always be preparing ourselves to receive the sacraments so that we can be fueled and continue to grow. So hopefully this answers your questions. And be very careful of yayology, which is rampant, and something that I think as we learn and as we grow, we come up with the actual reasons. And one of the beautiful things about Orthodoxy is that we do have these answers. So as the answers are presented to you, and as I can give you these answers in video form, which is a lot easier than writing an email back, hopefully it will dispel some of the rumors and some of the mysticism and some of the superstition and yayology that has been tossed around for many years. So don't underestimate the role of a woman in the church. It's much more than we think, and just because a woman's not a priest doesn't make a woman less. We have the Virgin Mary as the great example of that, and so many churches named after her because of her greatness in the church. So remember, it took a woman to bring the Savior into the world, and we can never underestimate that. And it, as one of the prayers says for the blessing of the waters, it says, fatherless from your mother and motherless from your father. So may Christ watch over us, and may all the female saints, the beautiful martyrs, saints, healers, teachers, may they all be with us always. Amen.